Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are to disregard any comments made by the state as it relates to what the law enforcement community wants and the wishes of the family with regard to a sentence. This is not to be considered by you in your deliberations. Okay, Mr. McMaster, you may proceed.
Look to the evidence in this case, ladies and gentlemen. Look to the evidence. And if you do, I submit that you will conclude that the evidence in this case demands that you recommend a sentence.
Yes, you may.
Look to the evidence. I submit to you that the evidence in this case shows you that the proper verdict, proper recommendation is that the death penalty be imposed on Mr. Bradley. Thank you.
A closing statement by the defense.
May it please the court. Counsel of the state, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you for the efforts you have made to this point in time, for your patience, for your attentiveness, and for the efforts that you're going to be making in reaching this life or death decision. You're being asked to make a godlike decision, but you don't have, with all due respect, a God like this one. You must think thoroughly, deeply, honestly, with respect, civilly, in reaching this ultimate decision, which could result in the death of that young man, 24 years old now, 22 when this happened, barely an adult. Whether this man lives or dies, and you must do this with calm, thorough deliberation. Now, as I listened to the state attorney's argument, I felt the anger and the revenge, the feelings of wanting retribution. I felt them rising. Not exactly the type of atmosphere which we people, we human beings, do our best thinking. And so the instructions actually deal with that. They say you cannot reach a verdict or reach a decision or make a jury recommendation because you're angry with anyone or feel sorry for anyone or because of sympathy. While you may be moved, and how can you not be? You cannot be moved by those factors, anger, revenge, sympathy, in making a selection as to what your recommendation is. I must mention make reference to victim impact evidence. There is no question Deputy Phil is a fine person, respected by her colleagues, the legal and the law enforcement community, loved by her family. No question about it. And that this is a tragic, unnecessary death. But you cannot consider that as an aggravating circumstance. You cannot, although moved by it, have that move you in any particular direction. You cannot have that information that you have before you about the impact of her death on the family. That cannot be the basis for your decision in any way. It's not an aggravating circumstance. That is the instruction that has been read to you and will be read to you. It does not lessen mitigation. It is just something that you're made aware of. It's very real, but all of the evidence that you are presented is focused strictly on the aggravating circumstances that will be read and the mitigating circumstances which will be read. Now, I'm concerned that, for a number of reasons, that at the end of this long trial, and it's been long for all of us, there have been breaks in it, and I can assure you that during the breaks, the attorneys have been hard at it, that because of my fallibility, my oversight, my fatigue, we're all tired, that I may overlook, I may fail to raise points, I may fail to make arguments that I shouldn't make. And for that, I urge you to, if you see points that I've neglected, if you think of arguments that I could have made, that you be the voice of fairness and reason and justice and make those arguments, raise those points, because I can't do them. And if I fail to do it, then it reflects on Mr. Bradley in a bad way, in a negative way, because his life is at stake. Why would you not do that? You should do that. You must do that. I'm also concerned that now that we have reached this second phase of the trial, the sentencing phase, that means in some degree that you have rejected our arguments and perhaps we have lost some credibility in your eyes. And then there's another instruction that somewhat deals with that. It says you are not to judge the lawyers. The lawyers are not on trial. I don't want to say I don't care what you think about me, but I am concerned that because of the arguments we've made, the positions we've taken, that somehow that will lessen your ability to consider what I have to say to you now. Because what I have to say is it's my only opportunity to speak on this behalf of Mr. Bradley and to tell you why the sentence of life without parole would be an appropriate sentence, and to have you listen to that with an open ear and not reject it because you have rejected our arguments in the first part of the trial. We talked during jury deliberations about where you would stop, where you thought you could stop in the deliberation process. Would you stop when you hear
This is not the defendant's first rodeo. This defendant has had numerous chances. He's on probation, 4 separate felony counts, one of which was a prior robbery, a violent crime. The incident that occurred at the Econo Lodge, investigating the robbery that had...
Over the jury instructions, Okay, I changed the second. The defendant had a 2-year relationship with Carrie Ellison, during which she became pregnant with his child, period. She miscarried a few days after the death of Trevante Williams, period. Thereafter, the defendant began a period of significantly greater drug abuse, period.
Well, sure, yeah, I can do that, but I know I'm going to vote. That wasn't your response. We take that at face value. And when you take an oath, when you make an oath, that's a promise. Y'all are sitting here because you're responsible citizens. And an oath, you recognize to be a promise. And I urge you, as strongly as I know how to do that, to consider the mitigating circumstances, go through that process, and not just stop where the state tells you to stop when they say that this aggravating circumstance or that or altogether alone justify the death penalty. Because they don't, what they do, if established, is establish that a death penalty is an option. It's a possibility, legally. Before that point in time, it isn't. Merely a finding of first-degree guilt of first-degree murder does not establish eligibility for death. It requires that additional proof. And then once it's made, then that alone doesn't establish that a death penalty is appropriate. It establishes eligibility. And it also puts a requirement on you that you consider mitigating circumstances. And you engage in this debate, this discussion, civil, because there will be strong feelings, and you may find yourself angry in your disagreement, but don't do that. Don't go there. Just deal with this calmly and civilly. But do this. Engage in this fact-finding, this weighing process, and keeping in mind that you are never required for death. Life is always on the table. It's always an option. Mercy is always an option. That is an option that you have. Even if they present all of the aggravating circumstances in the world, we presented no mitigating circumstances. We know that's not the case, because we presented lots of mitigating circumstances. Even then, if the aggravating circumstances outweigh the mitigating circumstances, you can still exercise mercy and vote for life without parole. It concerns me sometimes when people say, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can engage in that. No problem. Really? I mean, this should be a problem. If it isn't a problem, that's a problem. It should be the hardest, if not one of the hardest decisions you've ever had to make. It's got to withstand the test of time. You've got to be able to look back in a year, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and say that was the right decision. Because once it's done, once it's carried out, it's forever. It cannot be undone. Make no mistake, by finding Mr. Bradley guilty of first-degree murder, you have sealed his fate. He will die in a Florida prison. And so the sentencing options are death, which you know what that is. Life without parole. What is life without parole? That means he will never leave prison alive. And what is life in prison like? Now, you don't leave your common sense and your knowledge of the world outside the door. You come into the courtroom, you bring that with you and trying to figure out, what does this mean? What does that mean? Now you've got to make a choice. What is the appropriate sentence? So why would you not want to give as much thought to what, qualitatively, what it means to serve a sentence of life without parole? You can do that. You must do that. Because you've got to compare these two and decide it. Life without parole means you live in a bathroom-sized cage. You live with people that you don't choose to be with, people who are sentenced, removed from society because they could be, and the people who commit the most violent crimes are put in the most maximum secured prisons, told where to go, when to go to the bathroom, where to go to the bathroom, where to eat, when to get up. There's no freedom there, none. And their constant companions are people like themselves or worse. There is a pecking order, as you can imagine. You know what prisons are like. Not you need to have ever been in one, but you heard that the strong prey on the weak. The bright, more intelligent prey on the less intelligent. That those who are able to take from others do so. Look at Mr. Brad. He's not a big man. He's not especially strong. He's not especially bright. He was tested at 70 IQ functionally by Dr. Olander. And Dr. Zapp took no issue with any of the testing that Dr. Olander did. He's brain damaged. He's on medication. He is a small, brain damaged man who will be thrown into this sewer with the worst of humanity. That will be his life if he gets a sentence of life without parole. So this man will either die on death row or he will die in the general population. And the decision is the one that you're about to make. In a prison system, the guards, the correctional officers are law enforcement officers. And when inmates enter a prison, they undergo this screening process, which you somewhat was brought to your attention in the records of jail and prison that Mr. Bradley has been in. And the inmates are classified according to what they did and watched and observed based upon what they did by the correctional officers. And so it will be no secret that Mr. Bradley has killed a police officer. Now, in the prison world, where the guards or correctional officers are law enforcement officers, it is their duty to protect. That is their purpose. The inmates from each other and themselves from the inmates. But if it's in a situation where Mr. Bradley, who has killed a police officer, if they can choose to come to his aid, protect him or not, what do you think they're going to do? This is not a criticism of law enforcement officers. This is not a criticism of correctional officers. Correctional officers are professionals. Like lawyers, like doctors, some are better than others. There are good ones and there are bad ones. But number one, they can't watch all the inmates all the time. And if it's in a situation where they can come to the aid of an inmate and he happens to have killed a police officer, you think there may be the temptation there to maybe not protect him. What kind of protection will he get? And he'll need it. He will need to be protected when he's in prison. So life without parole is justice. Society will be protected from Mr. Bradley. That is your concern. He'll be locked up. He'll be watched as well as they can watch him. He'll be punished. A life in that environment, some would say, is worse than death. And they would be right. It would be a lawful sentence because it is one of the two sentencing options approved by the legislature in this state. And he is held accountable. He was held accountable when you found him guilty of first-degree murder. That first part of the trial, the guilt part, that was about blameworthiness. You found him guilty. You found that he was blameworthy. The second part of the trial, the part that we're in now, is deathworthiness. And that's where a thorough and honest consideration of Mr. Bradley's background, everything that we can bring to you about it, comes to play. So where did it begin for Mr. Bradley? In that process of examining how he started out, this baby, became this little boy who became this man. How does that happen? How did that happen for Mr. Bradley? We are the products of our environments. It's a combination of factors that determines how we get to be the persons that we are, partly genetic, it's in our genes in some respect, and the effects of our environment on our genetic makeup. And those two factors operate to determine who we are. Martin Luther King said, "Don't judge a man by where he is now, but judge him by the depths from which he came." And that's what we have attempted to show you, the depths from which Mr. Bradley came. And I'm not talking about a loving, nurturing upbringing in his family. I'm talking about, and this point was, I thought, fairly effectively made when Mr. McMaster was talking to Dr. Wu about Dr. Wu's colleague, Dr. James Fallon, who is a fellow neuroscientist who also works at the University of California, Irvine, involved in the same type of research as Dr. Wu, which examines the human brain and correlates that with behavior and uses PET scan to do it. And as Dr. Wu testified, and being familiar with Dr. Fallon and his book and his research, that yes, Dr. Fallon does have an abnormal brain scan of the frontal part of his brain. Like Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley has an abnormal orbitofrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain which regulates behavior. It's the stop-start mechanism, as Dr. Wu testified. It's also part of the brain that, when impaired, is associated with drug abuse and drug addiction. And we see that in Mr. Bradley's life as well. But when there is a dysfunction, when there is a deficit in that front part of the brain, and according to Dr. Wu, who examined the PET scan of Mr. Bradley's brain, there is a significant dysfunction, a significant impairment.
You should see me, and you're about to hear me. Mic check, 1, 2, 3, 4. Mic check. How's the mic sound? Good, thank you. We'll see you later.